What would you do if a detour on the worst night of your life led you to a secret that could shake an entire province? The rain came sideways. That was the thing Meredith Calloway, 52, would remember most about that October night on Highway 17. Not the grief sitting in her chest like a stone, not the empty passenger seat where her mother used to doze on long drives, but the way the rain came absolutely sideways, like the sky had simply given up on falling in the right direction. She had buried her mother 3 days ago in Sudbury, Eleanor Calloway, 79. 4 hours of funeral, 1 ham sandwich in the church hall, and a check from the estate lawyer for $6,200. The entirety of what remained after the nursing home invoices had taken everything else. Meredith had driven up alone because there was nobody else. No siblings, no husband, just her and her 2009 Civic and a paper bag of her mother's things that smelled like lavender and old receipts, and the particular sadness of a life reduced to what fit in a grocery bag. She should have stayed the night. She knew it the moment she pulled onto the highway at 8:30 and saw the first sheet of lightning pulse against the tree line to the west. But her lease renewal was due in Toronto on Monday, and she'd been out of work since February. A restructuring, they'd called it at the firm, as if attaching a word like that to the act of eliminating 43 accountants made it somehow more dignified, and she could not afford another night at even the cheapest motel in Sudbury. She had run the numbers in her head that morning, the way she ran every set of numbers, methodically and without sentiment. The check from the estate would cover 2 months of rent if she was careful, 3 if she didn't eat out at all. It was not a comfortable calculation. She was 40 kilometers past Espanola when the front tire caught the edge of the shoulder. It was that simple. One moment she was watching the wipers drag uselessly across the glass, and the next the car was sliding sideways off the pavement with a long, slow, terrible ease, like it had been planning this all along. The ditch wasn't deep, but it was enough. The Civic's front end dropped hard, the nose buried in 2 feet of muddy gravel, and the rear wheels spun uselessly against rain-slicked grass. Meredith sat very still for a moment, listening to the rain drum on the roof. Her phone showed no signal. It had shown no signal for the last 20 minutes. The coverage on this stretch of best of times, and to light fiction at the best of times. She had a half-empty water bottle, her mother's paper bag on the back seat, and a windbreaker entirely unsuited for October in northern Ontario. The temperature outside was 7 degrees and falling. In a stopped car with no heat, with wet clothes and no shelter, 7 degrees had a way of becoming dangerous much faster than most people ever needed to discover. She stepped out into the rain. The cold hit immediately, cutting through the windbreaker as if it wasn't there. The highway stretched empty in both directions, the asphalt black and gleaming. She swept her phone's torch along the tree line, the way a drowning person looks for anything that might hold weight. That was when she saw the chain-link fence. It was rusted almost to the color of the pines around it, half buried in the undergrowth that had spent decades pressing inward, but a section had long ago collapsed and lay flat in the weeds. Beyond it, barely visible through the wall of rain, was a structure. Low, rectangular, built from cinder block and corrugated metal, in the utilitarian style of another era. The sign above the main door had nearly given up being legible. She had to get close, rain running down her neck, to make out the words, Hargrove Timber, Regional Operations. The door had a padlock. The padlock had been there long enough that the hasp had rusted itself into something approaching solid iron. Meredith considered it briefly, looked back at the empty highway, then picked up a piece of broken cinder block from the ground beside the steps and hit the hasp twice. The second strike snapped it clean. Inside, the air was cold and stale and perfectly still, carrying the quality that sealed spaces develop over decades. Machine oil, mildewed paper, and something underneath both that she could not immediately name. A mineral flatness, the smell of preserved silence. She had a small keychain flashlight in her bag, a habit from years of working late in offices where the building's lighting was inadequate and the invoices were due regardless. She swept it around the room. It had been an administrative office. 4 metal desks sat coated in a grey fur of dust. Filing cabinet drawers hung open and empty. A 973 SO road map of Ontario was pinned to the far wall, its edges curled to brown scrolls. A coffee mug sat on the nearest desk with fossilized ring at its base, left exactly where someone had set it down the morning. This building was locked up and walked away from. In the corner stood a squat cast-iron stove. Meredith crossed to it immediately, opened the door, and found what felt like a small act of mercy. The previous occupant had left a stack of split birch inside, dry, because the damper had been properly shut. She found a box of matches in the top desk drawer, old, but the heads were still intact, and coaxed a fire to life with a shredded sheet from a notepad. Her hands were shaking badly enough that it took 3 attempts. When the heat finally began to push back the cold, she lowered herself to the floor with her back against the stove and let herself breathe for the first time since the car went into the ditch. That was when she noticed the wall. The firelight did it. It caught the cheap wood paneling at a low angle, the dark honey-brown kind found in every Ontario government office and insurance branch of the early 70s, and 2 of the panels on the left wall didn't respond quite the same way as the rest. The grain ran in a slightly different direction. The seam between them was a fraction too even, too deliberate. Meredith stared at it with the same expression she gave to any column of numbers where something was slightly, wrongly off. She got up, crossed the room, took the letter opener she'd found in the desk drawer, and pressed the tip into the seam. The panel swung inward on a concealed hinge. Behind it, set directly into the cinder block wall, was a small safe, no bigger than a microwave, painted over in the same cream as the surrounding wall, so that it would vanish entirely when the panel was closed. The combination dial was there, but the decades of paint had frozen the mechanism solid. She found a pry bar under the nearest desk. It took her 20 minutes and everything her arms had, bracing her boots flat against the wall, working the bar incrementally under the door's edge. The steel protested. The hinges gave ground grudgingly, millimeter by millimeter, and then, with a sound like a breath held for 50 years finally let go, the door swung open. Inside was a brown envelope, thick with folded papers, sealed with a strip of yellowed tape. On the front, in careful fountain pen script, "For Rosa, if something happens to me, please get this to the RCMP in Ottawa, not local." Ottawa. Beneath the envelope sat a ledger, the old accountant's kind with the mottled black and white cover, its rubber band fossilized into the spine. Meredith looked at the envelope for a long moment. Then she picked it up and broke the seal. Inside were 2 things, a tightly folded sheaf of carbon copy documents, provincial inspection reports, dated August and October of 1973, and a letter, handwritten, 3 pages, the ink still a clear and unhurried blue. November 18th, 1973. Dear Rosa, if you are reading this, then I didn't make it out. I've been trying to reach a phone that nobody at Hargrove has access to, and I am running out of time. I need you to understand what I found in Mr. Hargrove's private accounts. The holding dam at the Whitmore Creek operation failed on November 12th. 9 men were killed. You will have heard about it on the news as an accident, a natural structural failure after heavy rainfall. It was not an accident. I am the bookkeeper here, Rosa. I see every payment that leaves this company. 3 weeks before the dam failed, Callum Hargrove made 2 payments totaling $47,000 to a numbered company I had never seen in any of our records before. I traced it back. The numbered company belongs to a provincial building inspector named Grant Elsby. The dam had failed its structural inspection in August. Grant Elsby passed it in October for $47,000. 9 men went to work on November 12th. 9 men did not come home. Everything is in the ledger in this safe. Every payment, every date, every account number. The carbon copies of the original failed inspection are in this envelope with this letter. I have kept the originals hidden elsewhere. I am not writing where. I tried to bring this to Constable Rideout in town last week. He called Mr. Hargrove before I had even reached my car. I came home to find my apartment door open and nothing taken, just a message. I am going to try to drive to Sudbury tonight. If I make it, I will call you from there. If you don't hear from me by Friday, please come. Please find this. Please take the ledger to Ottawa. I love you, Rosa. Tell Mama I tried to do right by those men. Agnes. Meredith set the letter down on the desk. Her hands were not shaking anymore. They had gone very still, the way her hands always went still when she was reading something important, something whose full weight she was only beginning to measure. Agnes Kowalski. She thought about what it would have taken to write that letter on the evening of November 18th, 1973, to sit at a desk in this exact room with this same low ceiling and this same stale air, knowing someone had already been inside your apartment while you were out. Knowing the constable you'd trusted had picked up the telephone before you reached your car. To write "I love you and I tried" and then seal an envelope, fit it into a hidden safe, swing a wall panel shut, and walk out alone into a northern Ontario night. She opened the ledger. The handwriting was Agnes's, the same careful, unhurried script, column after column, dates, amounts, account numbers, names. The shorthand of a trained bookkeeper, compact and precise. Meredith read it the way she had read every set of books in her career, top to bottom, letting the pattern emerge without forcing it. By the third page, her stomach had dropped. The $47,000 to Grant Elsby. A second payment, $12,000, 2 weeks after the dam failure. Marked only settlement, W.C. Whitmore Creek. Then more entries, running through 1974. Payments to a different numbered company, their dates aligned exactly with notes Agnes had starred in the margin. Coroner's report amended. Families sign release. 9 families. 9 separate entries. Every dead man's family had been paid to be quiet. The coroner's report had been quietly revised, and in the years that followed, Callum Hargrove had taken the money saved from not repairing a dam, from not facing the liability of 9 dead workers, and built a logging empire across 3 provinces. Meredith turned to the ledger's inside back cover. Agnes had written one more thing there, in smaller letters, the pen pressed harder as if she were running low on both ink and time. Callum's son Wade is 14 years old. By the time anyone reads this, he will have grown up on money built on 9 men's graves. He should know what his father built. He needs to know what it cost. Wade Hargrove was not 14 anymore. Meredith had seen his face on election signs the entire drive up from Toronto. Wade Hargrove, 64, the Conservative candidate for Premier of Ontario. Former cabinet minister, patron of the arts, philanthropist, voice of Northern economic development. His campaign had been running ads about his family's legacy of building communities across the North. He was 8 points ahead in the polls with 3 weeks to the election. She sat in the firelight for a long time, listening to rain against corrugated metal, and understood with complete stillness what she was holding and what it meant that she was holding it. She was still sitting there when the headlights swept through the window. The truck came up the access road slowly. Not a lost driver, not a search and rescue volunteer doing random checks. It moved the way someone moves through a property they know and are responsible for, deliberate and unhurried. The engine cut, a door. Then a torch beam swept the building's exterior, and heavy boots came up the steps. Meredith moved. She closed the safe, swung the panel shut. She pressed the letter and the documents and the ledger flat into the bottom of her bag, under her mother's paper bag, and sat back down in front of the stove with her hands folded in her lap. The door opened. He was a large man, mid-40s, wearing a jacket with Hargrove Timber holdings stitched on the chest in new thread, newer than anything else in the building by 4 decades. His torch found her immediately. "This is private property," he said. "My car's in the ditch on 17, Meredith said. Her voice was level. She had spent 30 years delivering difficult financial news to company directors without allowing her voice to waver, and that skill, it turned out, did not leave you. I needed to get out of the rain. I found the door unlocked. She paused. I haven't touched anything. The man, she would learn later his name was Kurt Nilsson, head of operations security for Hargrove Timber Holdings, moved his torch around the room. It found the fire in the stove. It found the desk where she'd been sitting. It crossed to the left wall. It paused on the wall panel. Meredith stood up and pulled her bag onto her shoulder. I would really appreciate a ride to the nearest gas station, she said. My daughter has been trying to reach me since I left Sudbury. If she doesn't hear back soon, she'll call the OPP. She said it the way she said numbers, factually, without emphasis, as if it were simply information being conveyed. Kurt looked at the panel for one moment longer, then he looked at her. There's a station in Espanola, he said, 22 kilometers west. That's perfect, said Meredith, thank you. He drove her there without much conversation. She sat in the passenger seat with her bag on her knees and her mother's paper bag at her feet, and she looked at the rain on the windshield the whole way. She thanked him pleasantly when he stopped and walked inside without looking back. She waited until his taillights were gone. Then she asked the attendant if she could use the landline and called the RCMP non-emergency number. When the operator answered, she asked to be connected to the Major Crimes Unit in Ottawa. Not local, Agnes had written Ottawa. The investigation took 3 weeks. Meredith gave 4 separate interviews, surrendered the ledger and all documents to federal investigators, and signed a statement detailing every particular of how she had found the safe and what it contained. A forensic accountant from the federal unit, younger than Meredith, intense, with the distracted energy of someone in the middle of something important, reviewed the ledger and then looked up and said, "This is remarkable work. Whoever kept these records knew exactly what they were doing." Meredith thought about correcting her. The records weren't hers. They were Agnes's. Agnes had known exactly what she was doing. Wade Hargrove's name was removed from the ballot 4 days before the provincial election. His campaign issued a press release about personal matters. The arrest warrant came 2 days after that, along with a federal charge against the estate of the late Grant Elsby, which had been quietly accumulating interest for 52 years. The families of the 9 men at Whitmore Creek were notified by investigators before the story broke publicly. Several of them had spent decades believing the official account. Several of them had signed releases under duress, given money they had been too young and too overwhelmed and too afraid to refuse. The news hit all of them differently. A few cried. One man, whose father had been among the 9, told a reporter he felt like he could breathe for the first time since 1973. Before she drove back to Toronto, Meredith found Rosa. Rosa Kowalski-McTavish, 79, was not difficult to locate. She was in the directory of a care facility in Thunder Bay, listed plainly as any ordinary person is listed when they are simply going on living their life, waiting without knowing they are waiting. She was a small woman with careful eyes and hair the color of January frost, and she was sitting beside the window in room 14 when Meredith knocked and asked if she might come in. Meredith sat down across from her and set the envelope on the table between them. For Rosa, the handwriting had not faded. Rosa looked at it without moving for a long time. Her hands lay still in her lap. "She never made it to Sudbury," she said at last, not a question. "No, Meredith, I'm sorry." "We always knew." Rosa's fingers moved slowly to the edge of the envelope. "The family. We knew from the silence she would never have stopped writing otherwise. But there was nothing we could prove, and the police here said she had simply left town, packed up and gone without a word, and after enough years you almost begin to carry the not knowing instead of the knowing, because it's lighter." Just barely. She looked up at Meredith. Where was she? "She made it to the office," Meredith said. "She hid everything exactly where she meant to. She did everything right, Rosa. She just needed someone to come along 50 years later and open the right door." Rosa opened the envelope with the slow care of someone handling something irreplaceable. She unfolded the letter. Read the first line. And then Rosa McTavish, who had last seen her sister's handwriting in 1973 and had spent 52 years carrying the weight of not knowing, put her hand over her mouth and wept the way people weep when a grief they have learned to live beside. Finally, at last, has somewhere to go. Meredith stayed with her for nearly 2 hours. She didn't talk much. She sat in the chair across from the window, while the November light moved slowly across the floor between them, and she thought about her own mother's paper bag in the back seat of the Civic and the $6,200 check, and the long drive home through whatever the weather was doing now. She thought about Agnes sitting at a desk very much like these, writing "I tried" and meaning it completely. And she thought, sometimes the wrong turn is the right one. Sometimes the ditch is exactly where you needed to end up. What would you do if a night that seemed like your worst turned out to be someone else's answered prayer? Leave your answer in the comments, and if Agnes Kowalski's courage stayed with you, hit the like button and share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe with notifications on, so you never miss the moment when an ordinary person does something that matters. For Agnes, for the 9 men at Whitmore Creek, and for every Rosa still sitting by a window, waiting for a letter that is already on its way.